I still remember the exact way the air felt in that room. It was a Thursday afternoon, one of those slow, post-lunch hours, when the office hums with that strange mix of boredom and caffeine jitters. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above me, and I was halfway through sorting invoices when I heard my boss's voice from behind. "Got a minute?" It wasn't a question. It was the kind of tone people use when they already know you'll drop everything. I followed him into his office, still holding the pen I'd been using. The door clicked shut behind me, and for a second I wondered if I'd messed something up, but then he smiled. Not the polite work smile he gave clients. This was slower, deliberate, like he was about to share something important. "I've been watching the way you've been handling things lately," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The long hours, the attention to detail. You've really stepped up." And then he said the words, "We've got a management position opening up soon, and I think you'd be perfect for it." I swear my brain stopped processing after that. All I could think about was how his voice had dropped slightly when he said perfect, like it meant more than just a formality. My heart was pounding in my ears, but I tried to keep my expression calm, like this wasn't the moment I'd been secretly hoping for. "Of course, nothing's official yet," he added quickly, "but I wanted to give you a heads up, so you can prepare yourself." Prepare myself. Those two words lit up my imagination like fireworks. I could see it so clearly, the manager's office at the end of the hall. The one with the bigger window and that ridiculous leather chair. No one else was allowed to sit in. I imagined my name on the door, the raise, the way people would look at me differently. It's embarrassing to admit now, but I felt chosen, like all the late nights and skipped lunches were finally paying off. I let myself believe him without a shred of doubt. Why wouldn't I? He looked me right in the eye when he said it. As I stood up to leave, he reached out and shook my hand. Firm grip, steady eyes. The kind of handshake that's supposed to mean something. And in that moment, I thought it did. I walked back too, my desk feeling lighter than air. Even the flicker of the overhead light, the one that always annoyed me, felt like part of the before version of my life. The after was coming soon. The days after that conversation felt different. It's funny how a single sentence can turn the same stale routine into something electric. The office hadn't changed. The carpet still smelled faintly of burnt coffee. The printer still jammed every other Tuesday. But now, every small annoyance felt temporary, like I was on the edge of something bigger. I started staying late. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The glow of the monitor in the empty office at night felt almost sacred. Everyone else would be gone, and I'd be there tying up loose ends, double-checking reports, answering emails I didn't even need to answer yet. I told myself I was proving I deserved it, but honestly, I think I just wanted him to notice again. Sometimes, when I'd pass his office on the way out, I'd see his lights still on. I'd knock softly and say, "Heading out now." He'd glance up from his screen with that approving little nod. The kind of nod that makes you feel like you've just been knighted. I even started dressing a little differently. Nothing dramatic, just sharper. Cleaner lines, a new tie here and there, a blazer on days when I didn't need one. It was like I was already stepping into the role, rehearsing for the part I'd been promised. At home, I caught myself daydreaming about how I'd rearrange the new desk. I imagined my favorite coffee mug on the corner, maybe a small plant to make it feel warmer. I thought about the sound my chair would make when I spun around to face the window during late afternoons. Watching the light fade over the parking lot while I made important decisions. I know. It sounds ridiculous now. But at the time, it felt like preparation, not fantasy. The funny part, I started trusting him more. That one conversation had flipped some internal switch. If he asked me to cover an extra shift, I didn't think twice. If he needed a last-minute report, I'd have it done before he finished the sentence. I didn't see it as extra work anymore. I saw it as loyalty. I thought loyalty was a two-way street. There was one night, maybe 2 weeks after the promise, when I stayed the latest I'd ever stayed. The building was dead silent, just the hum of the air vents and the occasional creak from the walls settling. I was finishing up a spreadsheet when I heard his office door open. "You're still here?" he asked, sounding Most impressed? Laughed and said, "Gotta keep up with my future workload, right?" He smiled, didn't say much else, and walked out. But that smile stuck with me all night. I didn't realize it then, but I was already building a story in my head. A story where hard work always gets rewarded, where promises mean something, where people in power keep their word. Looking back, I wish someone had told me how dangerous it is to believe in that story without question. It happened on a Monday morning, not that Mondays are ever kind. But this one had a different weight to it. Heavy, restless air that clung to everything. I'd just sat down at my desk, coffee still too hot to drink, when my phone buzzed. An email, subject line, "Meeting, please join." No details, no explanation, just a time. 10 minutes from now. It was from him. I remember walking down the hallway, toward his office, my shoes sounding too loud against the carpeted floor. I told myself it was probably a good thing. Maybe this was the meeting, the moment when someday soon became today. But the second I stepped inside, I knew it wasn't that. He didn't greet me with that slow, deliberate smile this time. No handshake. No small talk. He gestured for me to sit, and I noticed his eyes didn't quite meet mine. The conversation started cold. "I'm afraid there's been a change in plans," he said, flipping a paper on his desk as if it held the answers. "With the recent budget cuts and restructuring, the management role is no longer available." Budget cuts, restructuring. Those words hit my ears like they were in a different language. I stared at him, waiting for the part where he said, "But here's what we can do instead." That part never came. It's strange I can remember the sound of the air vent buzzing above me more clearly than I remember half of what he said after that. My brain just stopped keeping up. I was nodding, making polite noises, trying to look composed while something inside me cracked. He kept talking about unfortunate timing and company-wide decisions like we were just two people on the same side of an unfortunate situation. But we weren't. He was the one who had promised me something, and now he was burying that promise under corporate jargon. 5 minutes. That's all it took to dismantle weeks of hope. When the meeting ended, he didn't stand to shake my hand. He just said, "We appreciate everything you've done." I walked out, holding nothing. No new title. No raise. Just the same desk, the same chair, and a hollow feeling in my chest. The strangest part? No one else in the office seemed to notice. Passed by colleagues who smiled at me like everything was normal. I sat back at my desk, staring at my inbox. Pretending to work while my mind replayed his words on loop, it wasn't just disappointment. It was disbelief, like waking up from a dream you didn't want to end, only to find that you're still in the same room you started in. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow from the street lamp outside painting. Faint orange lines across my wall. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face in that meeting, the way he avoided looking directly at me. The slight shuffle of papers like they were a shield. I replayed everything, every compliment he'd given. Me in the weeks leading up to this? You've got great leadership instincts. Not everyone could have handled that client as smoothly as you did. You're exactly the kind of person we need in management. At the time, those words had felt genuine. Now, they just felt rehearsed, like he'd been feeding me. Lines to keep me motivated until he didn't need me anymore. The more I thought about it, the more little moments started to stand out things I had brushed off before. The hushed phone calls in his office where the door was always half closed, and his voice dropped so low I could barely hear a murmur. The sudden changes in his schedule. Meetings added and canceled without notice. Trips that weren't on the official calendar. The awkward silences when I walked into the break room and a couple of higher-ups were talking. Conversations that stopped mid-sentence. Back then, I told myself I was imagining things. But lying in the dark now, those moments lined up like a row of warning signs I had been too blinded by ambition to see. Even small details came back to me, the way he'd once mentioned that the budget was tight, but a week later approved. A ridiculously expensive espresso machine for the executive lounge. Or how the company had no room for raises but somehow found money to renovate his office. It's strange how betrayal feels different from disappointment. Disappointment is a dull ache. Betrayal is sharp. It makes you want to dig for proof, see the wound and know exactly what caused it. By the time the sun started bleeding pale, light into the room, I knew I wouldn't be able to just move on. Not without answers. That morning at work, I noticed things with new eyes. The way his assistant wouldn't quite meet my gaze when I said good morning. The stack of folders on his desk, labeled with projects I'd never heard about. The smirk from one of the senior staff that felt just a little too knowing. It wasn't just budget cuts, and I was going to find out what it really was. It happened on a Tuesday evening. The office was thinning out, that quiet time between normal work hours and why are you still here? I was gathering up some files to finish at home when I remembered I'd left my notebook in the conference room. Walking past his office, I saw the light was still on. His door was slightly open, not enough to invite someone in, but not closed. Enough to say, "Stay out." I don't know why I glanced in. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I already knew deep down that something was off. He was leaning over his desk, eyes fixed on his monitor. His hands hovered above the keyboard like he was frozen mid-thought. On the screen, I caught a flash of words in bold. Management. Contract, offer letter. For a split second, my stomach flipped. I thought maybe it was mine. Maybe the promotion was still happening. Maybe he'd been stringing me along for some reason I couldn't understand. But then, my eyes landed on the name. It wasn't mine. It was someone else's, a name I recognized. Someone from another department. Someone who, as far as I knew, hadn't been grinding away for late nights and weekends like I had. Someone who just happened to laugh at all his jokes a little too eagerly. Who somehow always ended up sitting next to him in meetings. I froze there in the hallway, my pulse hammering in my ears. The glow from his monitor lit up his face in a way that made him look different, colder, focused, but not in the way you'd expect from a budget cut victim. I stepped back quietly before he noticed me. The sound of my own breathing too loud in my head in that moment. The story I'd been telling myself about bad timing and company decisions cracked in half. This wasn't about budget cuts. This wasn't about restructuring. This was about replacing me with someone he wanted, for reasons that had nothing to do with qualifications. On the drive home, I replayed that single glance at the screen over and over. The name, the contract. The fact that it was dated last week, before my meeting with him, before he looked me in the eye and told me the position was gone. I didn't want to believe it. But the seed of suspicion had already rooted itself deep inside me. And seeds grow fast in the dark. Once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. That contract on his screen, the name, the date, it played in my mind like a flashing neon sign I couldn't turn off. Every interaction I'd had with him since felt staged. Every smile rehearsed. I started small. In the break room, I'd linger a little longer when conversations drifted toward management changes. Over lunch, I'd ask colleagues, harmless sounding questions. Hey, did you hear who might be stepping into that role? I kept my tone casual, like I was just making small talk. It didn't take long to hear her name again. Always in the same hushed tone. Always with a hint of something unspoken. Then I noticed other things, patterns I'd ignored before. She was suddenly invited to meetings that had nothing to do with her department. She was CC'd on emails she had no reason to be copied on. Her desk was moved closer to his office, temporarily, according to HR. It wasn't hard to connect the dots, but I wanted proof, the kind you can't shrug off as office gossip. So I started digging deeper. I combed through old company memos in the shared drive, comparing dates. The budget cuts announcement had been drafted months earlier, yet the offer letter I saw on his screen was dated after that. One night, I even searched public business filings just to see if there was any connection between her and him outside of work. I almost wished I hadn't. There it was, a small side business registered under her name, with him listed as a partner. No mention of it anywhere in company disclosures. That was it. It's the missing piece. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a deal, one that had nothing to do with qualifications, nothing to do with company needs. Just two people using the system to their advantage, and I was collateral damage. The worst part? He looked me in the eye, knowing all of this, and still fed me that budget cut story. That wasn't just dishonest, it was calculated. Remember sitting at my desk late one evening, staring at the dull blue glow of my monitor? The office was quiet, but my thoughts were loud, buzzing with a mix of anger and clarity. I wasn't imagining things anymore. This was real, and now that I knew the truth, the question wasn't if I'd act on it, it was how. There's a moment when betrayal stops feeling like a puzzle and starts feeling like a punch in the gut for me. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, standing at the copier. The machine was grinding away, spitting out page after page, and somewhere between the worry and the hum, I realized my hands were shaking. Up until then, I'd been treating this like a mystery to solve. I told myself I was just collecting facts, connecting threads, being smart about it. But the truth hit me hard right there in that bland, fluorescent-lit corner. It wasn't just business, it was me. I wasn't passed over because of timing or budget cuts. I was deliberately lied to, strung along, used, and the person who did it wasn't some faceless executive in a far-off office. It was someone I trusted, someone whose approval I'd worked for. The flashbacks started coming in sharper now, like my mind was replaying every scene in high definition. Him leaning against my desk, telling me I had a bright future here. The way his voice softened when he said, "You've got the kind of work ethic we need in leadership." The firm handshake in his office is the one that had felt like a promise, and then the darker ones. The way his eyes darted, away from mine during the budget cuts meeting. The half-smile he gave me in the hallway last week, the one I'd read. As friendly but now just felt smug, it was like someone had taken a highlighter to all those moments. Marking them as lies I should have seen through, the hurt morphed into anger fast. My chest felt tight, my jaw clenched. I caught myself snapping. A little too quickly when a coworker asked for help with something. It wasn't their fault, but my patience for anyone, anything, was thinning. I'd always thought of myself as even-tempered, someone who didn't let emotions steer the wheel. But now, every time I saw him walk past my desk, chatting easily with people, I felt a heat rise in me that I'd never felt before. Not just anger at him, but anger at myself for letting him play me so easily. I started avoiding him. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't trust what I might say if we were alone in the same room. The last thing I wanted was to give him the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Still, I knew I couldn't stay in this place forever, simmering in it. Something had to change, and I was done waiting for him to do it. I've never been one for public confrontations. Some people thrive on them, the sharp words, the dramatic exits. But I knew that if I went charging into his office with accusations, it would just give him time to spin the story, paint me as emotional or misinformed. No, if I was going to walk away, I wanted to do it on my terms. And that meant playing the long game. The first step was simple. I started documenting. Every email, every memo, every little scrap of proof that contradicted his budget cuts story, all of it quietly saved to a secure folder on a drive he couldn't touch. I didn't know if I'd ever use it, but having it felt like armor. Next came observation. I paid attention to his routines when he left early, when he stayed late, who he talked to behind closed doors. I kept my own face neutral, never letting on that I knew what he'd done. If anything, I was friendlier than before. Little too friendly, let him think I'd moved on. At the same time, I started planting seeds outside of the office, reaching out to old contacts, quietly exploring openings in other companies. I didn't tell a soul at work. In fact, I went out of my way to look even more committed. I still stayed late, still delivered spotless work. I still smiled in meetings. But inside, I was already gone. There was a strange satisfaction in it, knowing I was 2 steps ahead while he went about his day, unaware that I was preparing my exit. It was like watching a slow game of chess, where the other player didn't realize they'd already lost their queen. One night, as I was leaving, I caught my reflection in the darkened glass of the lobby doors. I looked calm, not the simmering, restless person I'd been weeks ago. This was a different kind of calm, the kind you get when you know the ending, even if no one else does. I didn't need to blow up his office or send out some scathing company-wide email. That's what he might have expected, but I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Instead, I'd leave so quietly that he wouldn't even realize the damage until I was already gone. Sometimes you don't even have to push. Sometimes the truth just finds its own way out. It started with something small, a casual conversation in the break room. I was making coffee when one of the senior staff mentioned an upcoming audit. Not the routine kind either. This one was being handled by an outside firm, apparently. Few inconsistencies had been flagged in expense reports. I didn't say a word, just nodded, sipped my coffee, and filed that information away. A week later, the office felt different. There was a tension in the air, like everyone was holding their breath. People whispered more. Doors closed faster. I saw his office blinds pulled shut in the middle of the day, something I'd never seen before. Then it happened in all-staff email. Went out from HR, the kind written in vague corporate language that pretends to be professional, but still manages to feel like gossip. They announced that certain individuals were being placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. His name was on the list. I read that line 3 times, not because I didn't believe it, but because part of me wanted to savor. The details started trickling out, not officially, but through the office grapevine. His side business with her had been discovered. Unapproved contracts, conflicts of interest, breaches of trust, all the phrases you'd expect in situations like this. And just like that, the story he'd worked so hard to control unraveled in front of everyone. I wasn't the one who exposed him. That was the best part. All I had to do was sit back and watch the cracks widen on their own. Those documents I'd collected, never even used them. Turns out people like him dig their own holes. They just need enough time to fall in. When they escorted him out of the building, I wasn't there. I was across town having lunch with a recruiter from a company I actually respected. My phone buzzed with a text from a coworker. "You won't believe what just happened." I smiled into my coffee. I believed it. I'd believed it for a long time. From my safe distance, I imagined the look on his face, that split second when he realized he wasn't in control anymore. And for the first time since this all began, I felt lighter. There's something strangely liberating about walking away without a scene, no grand speech, no mic drop moment, just leaving quietly, completely. By the time his office was officially empty, blinds drawn, desk cleared, nameplate gone, my own decision had already been made. The offer from the other company was sitting in my inbox, ready for me to click accept. I didn't even hesitate. My last day came faster than I expected. I packed my things in silence, moving at an easy pace. There wasn't much to take. Few framed photos, a mug, a stack of notebooks filled with old meeting scribbles. I'd made sure not to accumulate too much here. Maybe deep down, I'd always known this wasn't where I was meant to stay. When I walked past his old office, I didn't feel the sting I thought I would. It was just a room now for walls and a desk. The memory of him in it was already fading. I didn't tell many people I was leaving. The few I trusted got a short, warm goodbye. No details. I wasn't leaving because of him. Not anymore. I was leaving because I was ready for something better. Stepping outside that building. For the last time, I took a deep breath. The air felt different. Lighter, cleaner. It wasn't because the city had changed. It was because I had. I wasn't carrying the weight anymore. Not the anger, not the disappointment, not even the need for revenge. He'd already lost more than I ever could have taken from him. I still had everything that mattered. My dignity, my work ethic, my ability to start over as I walked toward my car. I glanced back once, not in regret, not even in nostalgia, just to mark the moment. Then I turned away for good.